Hi there, welcome to Lamlam's audiobook novel channel. Today's story is titled, Beneath the Apron. Chapter 1. The Heir in Chains. The crystal chandelier above the dining table glowed like a cage of stars, but Alexander Knight had never felt more trapped. The room reeked of old money. Polished mahogany, silver cutlery lined up with military precision, wine breathing in crystal decanters older than some countries. It was supposed to feel like home. Instead, every detail reminded him of the empire that had already claimed his soul. Victor Knight, his father, sat at the head of the table, back ramrod straight, eyes as sharp as the knives resting on the silk napkins. He didn't eat, he dissected. His gaze flicked to his son like a scalpel. "You embarrassed the company today," Victor said without preamble. Alex set down his fork. He hadn't even taken a bite. "I told the truth. You told investors we should focus on people, not numbers." Victor's tone was surgical, devoid of emotion. "This is not a charity, Alexander. It is Knight hospitality. We don't run on sentiment. We run on profit." Alex's hands curled against the linen. "You talk about profit like it's the only thing worth living for." "It is," Victor snapped, his voice echoing against the marble walls. "Do you think this empire was built on feelings? On daydreams? I bled for this family's name. And you?" He jabbed a finger in Alex's direction. "You will inherit it whether you like it or not. You are my son. You are my heir." The word tasted like iron chains. Alex pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the polished floor, a discordant sound in a room that allowed no imperfections. "I didn't ask to be your heir." Victor rose too, taller, broader, his presence filling the room like thunderclouds. "Ungrateful boy. Everything you touch, every breath you take, exists because of me. You are nothing without this family." Alex's chest tightened. He could feel the invisible shackles of his father's words, tightening like they always had. Since childhood, every friend he'd made had been checked for status. Every class he'd taken had been chosen to groom him for power. Every woman he'd dated had been dissected by the tabloids. His life had never been his own. And tonight something inside him broke. "No," Alex said, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "I am nothing because of this family. Because you never let me be anything else." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Victor's lips curled. "You are weak. You'll come crawling back when the world chews you up. And when you do, don't expect me to welcome you with open arms." Alex's pulse pounded in his ears, but he didn't flinch. "Then I won't come back at all." He turned before the fury in his father's eyes could pin him down. He walked out of the grand dining hall, out of the penthouse that looked more like a museum than a home, out into the night. The city air hit him like a slap. For the first time, no chauffeur waited at the curb, no black car gleamed at the ready. The doorman called after him, confused, but Alex kept walking, the chill biting through his tailored suit. He didn't care. He felt raw, exposed, and free. But freedom came with a price. Hours later, he sat on the edge of a fountain in a public square, the stone cold beneath him. He clutched a worn backpack, his only possession not branded with the Knight Empire. Inside was a handful of clothes, a wallet with only a fraction of what he normally carried, and no credit cards. He had stripped himself of everything that tied him to his father's world. For the first time in his life, Alexander Knight was just Alex. He leaned back and looked at the city skyline, glittering towers of glass and steel, monuments to ambition. Somewhere in those lights sat Victor, still plotting, still controlling. Alex's stomach knotted, but he refused to let fear win. He was 27 years old, heir to billions, and yet he had never once lived like a man of his own choosing. Tonight that ended. Across the city, in a cramped kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and tomatoes, Isabella Daniel scrubbed at a pan until her hands ached. The trattoria was nearly empty again, 3 tables filled all evening, not nearly enough to pay the bills stacked in her father's office. She closed her eyes, whispering to the memory of her late mother. "I won't let it die, Mama. I'll keep this place alive. Somehow." Her voice broke, but her resolve hardened. She would not give up, even if the world seemed determined to let her fail. And so, 2 lives moved in parallel that night. One man running from chains of wealth, one woman clinging to scraps of hope. They did not yet know their paths were already twisting toward collision. Chapter 2. Walking Away. The night air clung to Alex like a second skin as he left behind the gleaming towers of night hospitality. For the first time in his life, there was no car idling at the curb, no driver standing with cap in hand, no schedule mapped down to the last second by assistants. Just the city itself, vast and indifferent, buzzing with life that had never been his to touch. He adjusted the strap of the worn backpack on his shoulder. It was foreign the way it dug into his skin. He had packed it himself, another novelty. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, 1 battered pair of sneakers he hadn't worn since college. No tailored suits, no cufflinks, no silk ties. Every credit card, every business contact, every proof of his identity as Alexander Knight, heir to a billion-dollar empire, had been stripped away. All that remained was Alex, the man no one had ever bothered to know. The streets hummed with the language of the ordinary. Delivery trucks rumbling, neon signs flickering, laughter spilling out of dive bars, a couple arguing in the distance. Alex took it in hungrily. Each sound was a song he'd never been allowed to hear before. When the cold settled deeper, he boarded a city bus. It groaned as it pulled up, paint faded, windows scratched with initials of strangers long gone. He hesitated only a moment before climbing aboard, fumbling with the crumpled bills in his wallet. The driver gave him a bored look. $2.50. Alex handed over the money. No concierge to swipe a card. No assistant handling details. Just him, exchanging coins for the right to exist in motion. He chose a seat near the back. The smell of fried food, sweat, and faint perfume clung to the air. Across from him, a little boy pressed his nose to the window, tracing the city lights with a finger. His mother sat beside him, hair frizzed from the humidity, fatigue etched into her features. She caught Alex looking, offered a tired smile, then turned back to her child. No one recognized him. No one cared. And for the first time he felt a sliver of freedom. When the bus dropped him downtown, his stomach growled. Normally, meals were curated by chefs trained in Michelin-star kitchens, plates served like art, wine paired to perfection. Tonight, he followed his nose to a street vendor. The man behind the cart barely looked up. "Hot dog. $5. Alex nodded. The sausage hissed on the grill, wrapped in a bun that looked slightly stale. When he bit into it, mustard dripping onto his hand, the taste shocked him. It was greasy, unevenly cooked, imperfect. And yet, it was alive. It was flavor born not of luxury, but of hunger, of late nights and ordinary survival. He devoured it, each bite reminding him of how little he knew of the world. Later, he found himself at a public fountain, watching water dance under streetlights. He took off his blazer and used it as a pillow against the stone edge. His body ached in ways it never had after years of chauffeured rides and feather-soft bedding. But even discomfort felt real in a way silk sheets never had. He pulled out his phone, the last remnant of his old life. Messages blinked from Victor's office, from his assistant, from the board. His father's words echoed, "You'll come crawling back." Alex powered the device down and shoved it into his bag. He would not crawl. Somewhere across town, the smell of simmering tomatoes filled Isabella Daniel's world. The trattoria's kitchen was her kingdom and her prison both. Tonight had been another slow evening, 5 tables served, barely enough to pay utilities, let alone suppliers. Her father, Richard, sat at the counter with a glass of wine he couldn't afford, face heavy with worry he didn't bother to hide anymore. Isabella's hands moved with muscle memory, kneading dough, chopping basil, searing chicken breasts. Cooking wasn't just a job. It was a heartbeat, a way of keeping her mother's spirit alive. But the ledger in the office told a truth her knives couldn't cut through. The trattoria was sinking. She paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her arm. "We'll make it work," she whispered, though the walls had heard the lie too many times. Her younger sister Sophia poked her head into the kitchen. "Bella, maybe we should close earlier. Save on electricity." "No," Isabella's tone was firm, even though fear gnawed at her. "We stay open. Someone might walk through that door." But no one did. As midnight approached, Isabella extinguished the stove flames one by one. She stood in the silence, breathing in the ghost of her mother's recipes. She couldn't fail, not here, not in this kitchen. Her mother's laughter still echoed between these walls. Back in the city square, Alex stared up at the stars barely visible above skyscrapers. He thought of the gilded cage he'd left, the father who saw him only as an extension of an empire, the hollow applause of shareholders who would never know his name apart from his inheritance. For the first time in his life he had nothing. No identity, no certainty, no map forward. And yet, as the night deepened, Alex's night air in chains no more felt something Bialoom quietly in his chest. Oh. Chapter 3. The Trattoria Sign. The morning sun filtered weakly through skyscrapers as Alex walked aimlessly down side streets he had never once noticed before. His shoes scuffed from miles of wandering clicked against uneven pavement, a rhythm that reminded him he was no longer walking in polished lobbies or red-carpeted halls. His backpack dug deeper into his shoulder, and his stomach clenched from hunger. He stopped at a corner where the smell of garlic and bread drifted faintly on the breeze. For a moment, he thought it was a memory, another carefully curated meal from one of night hospitality's luxury restaurants. But this was different, humble, human. He followed the scent until he reached a weathered storefront. The sign above the door read, "Daniel Trattoria." The neon buzzed weakly, one letter flickering like it might die at any moment. The paint was chipped, the awning faded, and the window bore streaks from hurried cleanings. Yet behind the glass he saw warmth, wooden tables, handwritten specials, and the faint glow of a kitchen in motion. Alex pressed a hand against his empty stomach. He had spent the last of his cash on a bed in a rundown hostel. He couldn't keep drifting forever. Pushing the door open, he was greeted by the smell of tomatoes simmering and fresh dough arising. A bell jingled faintly, announcing his arrival. Inside, the trattoria was nearly empty, only one older couple sat eating quietly in a corner. Behind the counter, a man in his late 50s looked up. His shoulders were broad but slumped, his dark hair streaked with gray. His eyes, however, were sharp with suspicion. "Richard Daniel. What can I do for you?" His tone carried the weariness of someone who had spent years watching dreams unravel. Alex swallowed. He wasn't used to asking for anything. I was wondering if you're hiring." Richard set down the rag he'd been using to polish glasses. He gave Alex a slow once-over, his gaze catching on the clean-cut jawline, the too straight posture, the clothes that even stripped down still carried the ghost of wealth. "You don't look like someone who washes dishes for a living." Alex's jaw tightened. He couldn't tell the truth, not here. Not if he wanted to protect this fragile new life. "I'll do anything. Wash dishes, scrub floors, serve tables. I need work." Before Richard could answer, a young woman emerged from the kitchen, apron tied tight, flour smudged across her cheek. Isabella Daniel. Her eyes flicked between her father and the stranger at the counter. "What's going on?" "This young man thinks he's cut out for restaurant work," Richard said dryly. Isabella raised an eyebrow. She studied Alex with the same intensity she gave to every dish she plated. There was something unusual about him, the way he carried himself, the way his voice carried a weight he didn't seem aware of. And yet his eyes weren't arrogant. They were searching, almost desperate. "We could use the help," she said finally, though her tone was more pragmatic than welcoming. Richard frowned. Bella. We're short-staffed, Dad. If he's willing, let him try. We don't exactly have a line out the door. Richard hesitated, then sighed. Fine. But don't expect me to coddle you, he said to Alex. You mess up, you're out. Alex nodded quickly. I won't let you down. As Isabella handed him an apron, their eyes met briefly. There was no warmth in her gaze. Only challenge. Prove yourself, it seemed to say. Alex pulled the apron over his head, the fabric rough compared to the tailored suits he once wore. For the first time in his life, he was about to work for his survival. Meanwhile, across town, the marble floors of the Knight penthouse gleamed as Victor Knight stood in his office, voice cold over the phone. I don't care what it takes. Find him. His tone carried the command of a man who had built empires from steel and blood. He walked out like a fool, and if the press catches wind of it, the board will start asking questions. On the other end of the line, a private investigator gave a measured reply. We'll track him, sir. He can't disappear for long. Victor's jaw tightened. The truth was, he didn't care where his son had gone, not for Alex's sake at least. But investors were already whispering about succession, about stability. A missing heir could spook them, could threaten deals worth billions. He'll crawl back eventually, Victor muttered once the call ended, staring out at the skyline that bore his name. And when he does, he'll remember exactly who holds the power. Back at the trattoria, Alex found himself in the kitchen. Pots boiled, pans clattered, and Isabella moved with precise, practiced motions. She handed him a stack of dirty dishes. Start there, she said curtly. Alex rolled up his sleeves and plunged his hands into the sink. The water was scalding, the plates greasy, the task endless. His back ached almost immediately, but he kept going, determined. From the corner of her eye, Isabella watched him. Most newcomers complained, tried to slack off or quit within an hour. This man didn't. He worked silently, face set with focus, as if the weight of each dish meant something more. By the time the trattoria closed for the night, his hands were red and raw. He dried them on his apron, exhaustion pulling at his bones. Yet despite the fatigue, he felt something strange in his chest: satisfaction. For once, he had earned his own place, however small. Isabella crossed her arms. Not bad for a first day. You didn't run off. Alex gave a faint smile. I told you I wouldn't let you down. She studied him a moment longer before nodding, then turned back to her father. We'll see if he lasts the week. And as the door closed behind the last customer, Alex knew one thing. He had taken his first real step into a life that finally belonged to him. Chapter 4. Clumsy Hands, Hidden Skills. The next morning, Alex woke before dawn, the hum of the city seeping through the thin hostel walls. His back ached from the lumpy mattress, his fingers still tender from hours of scrubbing dishes the night before. But for the first time in his life, he rose without dread. There was no boardroom waiting, no father's orders echoing in his ears. Only a kitchen he barely understood, and the quiet, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, he could prove himself there. When he arrived at the trattoria, Isabella was already in motion. She moved like a storm contained in human form, tying her apron with sharp tugs, flour dusting her cheek, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. She barely looked at him as she thrust a loaf of bread into his hands. Toast it. Don't burn it. Alex nodded confidently. How hard could it be? Minutes later, smoke curled from the oven. The loaf emerged charred black, crackling like coal. Isabella wrinkled her nose, crossing her arms. Impressive, she said dryly. You've discovered a new element, carbon. Alex coughed, waving the smoke away. It's rustic. Her laugh was sharp, disbelieving, but it softened into a smirk. If you keep this up, we'll be serving ashes instead of bruschetta. Task after task unraveled in similar disasters. A tray of glasses slipped from his hands, shattering across the floor. Water sloshed everywhere as he tried refilling pitchers. When she handed him onions to chop, he nicked his finger within seconds. Isabella tossed him a bandage without even glancing up. "City boy," she muttered. "Bet you've never even washed your own socks." Alex forced a grin, though humiliation prickled at him. She wasn't entirely wrong. In his old life, other people had always handled the menial details. Maids, chauffeurs, assistants. But he couldn't add MIT that. Not here. Not if he wanted this new life to mean anything. So he kept going, clumsy but determined. He swept floors, scrubbed pans, ferried plates, each mistake fueling Isabella's arsenal of teasing remarks. Yet beneath the frustration, there was a flicker of something else. Stubborn pride. He refused to quit. By late afternoon, the trattoria filled with the comforting hum of customers. Isabella worked the stove, moving with swift precision, while Alex hovered at the prep station. She tossed him a pan of half-finished pasta. "Stir this. Don't mess it up." He stirred carefully, instinct guiding his hand. Without thinking, he added a pinch of salt, a twist of pepper, and a drizzle of olive oil. Flavors layered in his mind like music, something he had picked up from years of dining in the world's finest restaurants, though he would never say so aloud. When the dish was plated and served to a regular customer, Isabella braced herself for complaints. Instead, the woman smiled brightly. "This is delicious. Better than last week's. What did you change?" Isabella blinked, then glanced toward Alex. He avoided her gaze, pretending to busy himself with another task. Suspicion stirred in her chest. Later, as the last customers left, Isabella cornered him by the sink. "You stirred that pasta differently. What did you do?" Alex shrugged, feigning ignorance. "Just followed your instructions." Her eyes narrowed. "No, there was more to it. You're not as hopeless as you pretend." His pulse quickened. If she looked too closely, she might see through the cracks. He forced a sheepish smile. "Beginner's luck." She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "I don't buy it." "Fine. If you want to keep your secrets, that's your problem. Just don't burn my kitchen down." As she turned away, Alex exhaled slowly. He had survived another day barely. But Isabella's sharp eyes had already caught more than he intended. And though she didn't know it yet, the truth simmering beneath his clumsy facade was far more dangerous than a burned loaf of bread. Chapter 5. The notice on the table. The trattoria was unusually quiet that morning. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the back seemed subdued, as if the walls themselves braced for bad news. Isabella wiped down the last table, her movements sharper than usual, her jaw clenched tight. She hadn't eaten breakfast, her stomach tied in knots ever since her father opened the envelope that had arrived earlier. The paper still lay on the counter, face down, as if flipping it over might change what was written there. Richard Daniel had retreated to his office without a word, the weight of defeat pressed into the slump of his shoulders. Isabella hadn't dared follow. She already knew. Finally she picked it up. Notice of foreclosure. Her mother's handwriting still adorned the margins of the trattoria's original permit, framed on the wall nearby. To see her mother's legacy reduced to cold legal threats felt like a knife twisting in Isabella's chest. She carried the notice to one of the empty dining tables, sat down, and pressed it flat with trembling hands. First she just stared. Then the tears came hot, uncontrollable. She buried her face in her palms, muffling her sobs with the scent of lemon cleaner and wood polish. This place, this was all she had left, Isabella whispered through her tears. All we have left. And I'm losing it. Her voice cracked, the words barely audible over the silence. She clutched the paper tighter, knuckles white. I promised you, Mama. I promised I'd keep it alive. I can't. She choked on the words, rocking slightly in her chair. I can't lose it. Not after everything. She thought she was alone. But in the shadowed archway leading from the kitchen, Alex stood frozen, the tray in his hands forgotten. The sound of Isabella's sobs pierced him deeper than any of his father's insults ever had. He wanted to step forward to tell her she wasn't alone, that he could make everything disappear with a single phone call. The night fortune could erase the debt before the ink on the notice dried. But the secret that bound him, the secret that allowed him to live like an ordinary man, kept him rooted to the spot. He clenched his jaw, watching as she lowered her head against the table, shoulders shaking. She looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the sharp-tongued woman who mocked his clumsiness in the kitchen. This was a woman carrying her world on her back, about to crumble beneath its weight. His chest ached. He had never wanted to tell anyone the truth less, and never wanted to reveal it more. In his mind he heard Victor's voice. "You'll crawl back when the world chews you up." He saw the boardroom table, the cold stares of men who measured worth in profits. If he used his name now, if he reached into that endless vault of money, he'd be stepping right back into that world. He would no longer be Alex, the anonymous kitchen hand fumbling his way into a life that finally felt real. But if he stayed silent, Isabella would lose everything. The sound of a chair scraping startled him. Isabella stood, wiping her face furiously with her apron, as if erasing weakness from her skin. She folded the notice once, twice, then pressed it flat against the table. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. "No one is taking this place from me," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I can still fight." She left the dining room, heading toward her father's office with the letter in hand. Alex stepped forward slowly, drawn as if by gravity, until he stood where she had been. The folded notice still sat on the table. He reached for it, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. The words swam before his eyes. Unpaid debt, repossession, deadlines. All the cold, bureaucratic cruelty of a system that didn't care about passion or legacy. He gripped the letter tighter, so hard the edges bit into his skin. His face twisted with anguish, torn between two impossible choices. If he revealed himself, Isabella might save the trattoria, but she would also hate him for lying, for deceiving her from the very start. If he stayed silent, she would lose everything she'd fought for, and he would have to watch her break piece by piece. His pulse thundered in his ears. The kitchen bell jingled faintly as a breeze passed through the door. In that moment, Alex knew one thing for certain. The secret he carried was no longer just his own. It had bound itself to Isabella, to the trattoria, to the legacy she guarded with her heart. And sooner or later, it would destroy them both. He crushed the letter in his fist, eyes burning, his face a mask of anguish. Chapter 6. New recipes, old shadows. The morning light poured weakly through the trattoria's front windows, catching on the dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts of better days. Isabella sat at a corner table, arms folded across her chest, eyes hard on the stack of bills in front of her. Every invoice seemed to scream the same truth. They were out of time. Alex, sleeves rolled up, stood at the opposite end of the room, gripping the edge of a chair like it might steady him. He had overheard Isabella's sobs the night before, had watched her crumble under the weight of the foreclosure notice, and he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. Not about everything. Not about his determination to help. "I have an idea," he said carefully, breaking the silence. Isabella lifted her gaze, unimpressed. "Unless that idea comes with a blank check, I'm not interested." Alex winced but pushed forward. "Not a check. A plan." He stepped closer, trying to infuse confidence into his voice. "What if we refreshed the trattoria? Just a little. Theme nights, family Sundays, jazz and pasta Fridays. Something to make people curious again." Isabella arched an eyebrow, skeptical. "Theme nights. You think putting a saxophone in the corner will erase years of debt?" "No," Alex said quickly, shaking his head. "But it could start a buzz. People need a reason to come here instead of the chain restaurants down the street. If we give them something they can't get anywhere else, a story, an experience, they'll come." Sophia, Isabella's younger sister, padded into the room, phone already in hand. She caught the tail end of Alex's words and perked up. He's right. If we can get traction on social media, it could actually work. People love posting about quirky little places. One viral video could bring us weeks of business. Isabella groaned, dragging her fingers through her hair. Sophia, please. You think TikTok will save Mama's trattoria? Sophia straightened, her chin jutting out. Maybe it could. You're so busy fighting fires in the kitchen you don't see the world outside. A hashtag, people follow that stuff. They'd come if they knew we existed. Isabella looked between her sister and Alex, her frown softening ever so slightly. So what? Theme nights and Instagram posts. Alex nodded, pressing his advantage. And the menu? Small tweaks, nothing drastic. You've already got great dishes. But if we highlight a few specials, add a signature cocktail, something memorable, people will talk. He hesitated, then added, It's not money we have. It's creativity. We can use that. For a long moment, silence stretched. Isabella studied him, suspicion and fatigue warring in her eyes. She had dismissed him as useless, clumsy, more trouble than help. But here he was, proposing solutions that, even if she hated to admit it, made sense. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and let out a heavy sigh. Fine. We'll try it. But if this blows up in my face, you're scrubbing pans until your fingers fall off. Alex allowed himself a small smile. Deal. For the first time in months, a flicker of hope lit the trattoria's walls. Meanwhile, across town, the Heir in Knight Hospitality's boardroom was far less forgiving. Victor Knight sat at the head of a long mahogany table, his posture impeccable, his expression carved from stone. Around him, the board members shifted uncomfortably, papers rustling, pens tapping. On the massive screen at the far end of the room, charts and figures glowed, though no one seemed to be paying them much attention. Gentlemen, Victor began, his voice smooth as steel. Profits are steady. Our expansion into the Asian market is proceeding as planned. Knight Hospitality remains as strong as ever. But his words didn't erase the tension simmering under the surface. Finally, one of the older board members cleared his throat. And your son? Victor's gaze sharpened. What about him? There are rumors, another man interjected, that Alexander hasn't been seen in weeks. Investors are nervous. Stability of succession is always a concern in family-run empires. Victor's jaw tightened, though he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alexander is on a sabbatical. Personal matter. He will return when the time is right. The murmurs that followed were low but insistent. A woman at the far end of the table leaned forward. With all due respect, Mr. Knight, the press has already begun speculating. Questions about his fitness to lead, about your control of the situation. Investors do not like uncertainty. Victor's fingers curled against the polished wood. He wanted to slam his fist down, to remind them that Knight Hospitality existed because of him, not because of some entitled heir. But he couldn't show cracks, not here, not now. He is my son, Victor said, each word clipped. When the time comes, he will be ready to take his place. Until then, this company remains under my control. Do I make myself clear? The board members nodded reluctantly, but Victor could feel the shift, the doubt settling like a stain on pristine fabric. His empire was strong, but strength meant nothing if investors lost faith. When the meeting ended, Victor lingered alone in the boardroom, staring out at the skyline. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, hard, unyielding. Somewhere out there, Alex was hiding, and every day he stayed gone, Victor's grip on power weakened. Find him, Victor muttered under his breath, his voice low and dangerous, before he destroys everything. Back at the trattoria, Isabella wiped her hands on her apron, eyeing Alex with reluctant curiosity as he sketched ideas onto a scrap of paper. Sophia filmed a quick video of fresh pasta twirling on a fork, already planning captions. The trattoria still stood on the brink of collapse. But for the first time in a long while, It didn't feel like a lost cause. And though Alex kept his secret locked tight, a part of him dared to believe he had found a place where he belonged, if only he could keep the truth from shattering it all. Chapter 7, Sleeves Rolled Up. The trattoria had not been this alive in months. From the moment the first customers trickled in just after 6, the dining room seemed to pulse with energy. The soft hum of conversation swelled into laughter, silverware clinked against plates, and the scent of garlic and basil drifted thickly through the air. Table 4 needs menus. Sophia called, balancing a tray of glasses as her phone buzzed with notifications. The social media reel she'd posted the night before had already gained traction, hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. Local food bloggers had shared it, and curious customers were following their curiosity right through the trattoria doors. By 7, every table was full. By 8, a line formed outside. Isabella stood at the center of the storm, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back tight. Her knives flashed as she diced tomatoes, her voice sharp as she barked orders across the kitchen. Alex, bread basket for table 6. Sophia, stop texting and bring the wine to table 2. Dad, keep the register moving. Alex, thrown into the whirlwind, tried to keep up. He darted between kitchen and dining room, apron dusted with flour, arms full of plates. He was used to quiet shifts, a handful of customers, a pace slow enough that even his clumsiness could be hidden. But tonight was war. And war had no mercy. First, he tripped on a stray towel, barely keeping a stack of dishes from crashing to the floor. Then, in his rush to refill a water jug, he sloshed half of it down his front. The old Alex, the Heir in silk suits, would have blanched, humiliated. But this Alex gritted his teeth, wiped his shirt, and kept moving. Bread, Alex. Bread. Isabella's shout snapped him back to the counter, where baskets of half-sliced loaves waited. His hands moved clumsily at first, but then memory stirred. He sliced evenly, swiftly, with a precision that startled even him. Within moments, the baskets were filled and out the door. A cheer rose from the dining room as Sophia returned with steaming plates of pasta. "They love it," she whispered to Alex as she swept past, her eyes shining. "They're actually loving it." But the chaos wasn't done testing him. At 8:30, the trattoria's oven gave a violent sputter, flame flaring before dying down. The next pizza order came in just as Isabella realized the temperature had dropped too low to cook properly. She cursed under her breath, shoving her hair from her face. "We'll have to cancel the pizzas." "No," Alex cut in. He knelt by the oven, hands steady as he checked the pilot light. Years of watching engineers and chefs work in Knight's luxury kitchens flashed through his mind. He adjusted the gas valve, coaxed the flame back, and within moments the fire steadied. Isabella stared at him, momentarily stunned. "How did you dash?" "Lucky guess." Alex lied quickly, rising to his feet. "Try it now." She slid the pizza back in. The flame held. For the first time all night, Isabella's eyes softened as they met his. Not with suspicion. Not with disdain. With something closer to respect. The orders kept coming. Alex carried trays, cleared tables, refilled glasses. He moved clumsily at times, but when it mattered most, he was there, stepping in when Sophia nearly dropped a tray, calming a restless child with a silly face, even charming a couple into ordering dessert instead of leaving. By the time the last table emptied near midnight, the trattoria was exhausted but glowing. Tips overflowed the jar. The register rang fuller than it had in months. Isabella slumped against the counter, face flushed, apron stained. She let out a long exhale. "We survived." Sophia, perched on a stool scrolling through her phone, grinned. "Survived. Bella, we thrived. Look." She turned her screen. Their latest video had passed 1,000 views, comments pouring in from people promising to come tomorrow, the next day, the weekend. Richard, who had been silently tallying the register, let a small smile tug at his lips. Maybe there's hope for this place after all. Alex leaned against the wall, chest heaving, sweat cooling on his skin. He was exhausted, sore, every muscle aching. And yet he had never felt more alive. Isabella glanced at him then, flour still dusting his cheek, shirt half untucked, hair disheveled. He looked nothing like the useless kitchen hand she had mocked days earlier. Tonight, he had stood shoulder to shoulder with her, and in the chaos, he had proven himself. Not bad, she admitted, her voice low but sincere. For a rookie. Alex smiled faintly, brushing flour from his sleeve. Just trying to keep up. But inside, he felt a dangerous warmth spread in his chest. Isabella was beginning to see him differently. And the more she did, the harder it became to keep his secret buried. Chapter 8 Late Night Confessions. The trattoria was silent, the kind of silence that arrived only after a storm. The last customer had left hours ago. The tables were wiped, chairs stacked, dishes dried and shelved. The air still carried the faint perfume of basil and wine, clinging to the walls like memories. Outside, the streetlights buzzed against the empty sidewalk, but inside, only two figures remained: Isabella and Alex. They worked in tandem, the rhythm of cleaning filling the quiet. Isabella scrubbed at the stovetop with a rag, sleeves rolled high, dark hair slipping loose from its tie. Alex swept the floor, the broom rasping softly against the tile. For a while neither spoke. It was the kind of silence that might have felt suffocating days earlier, when Isabella's gaze had been all suspicion and sharpness. But tonight, after surviving the chaos of their busiest evening in months, the silence felt companionable. Last, Isabella broke it. Her voice was low, thoughtful, as though speaking to herself. "This place, it was my mother's dream, you know." Alex looked up, pausing mid-sweep. Isabella rarely spoke about her mother. He leaned the broom against the wall, waiting. She used to say food was love made visible. Isabella's hand slowed on the rag, her eyes growing distant. Every recipe here was hers. Every corner of this trattoria has her fingerprints. When she died, her throat tightened and she set the rag down, pressing her palms against the counter. When she died, I promised I'd keep it alive, that I wouldn't let her dream disappear. Her voice cracked, raw around the edges. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just keeping a ghost alive while drowning myself. Alex's chest ached. He wanted to reach for her, to ease the weight she carried alone. Instead, he stayed still, afraid to push her away if he moved too quickly. She turned then, leaning back against the counter, arms crossed. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp again, but this time not with suspicion, with challenge. "You probably think I'm crazy, throwing myself into this failing business when I could have, I don't know, real job, a normal life." "I don't think you're crazy," Alex said softly. "I think you're brave." She studied him for a long beat, her expression unreadable. Then, with a humorless laugh, she dropped her arms. "Brave? But is that what they call stupidity these days?" Alex opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off, her tone sharpening. "And then there's Dominic." The name hit the air like a bitter spice, souring the room. "He was my fiancé," Isabella continued, her voice brittle. "He said all the right things, made me believe he cared about me, about this place. But in the end it was all lies. He wanted money. My inheritance, my mother's recipes, the trattoria's property deed. When I refused to sell out, he walked away. Just like that." Her fists clenched at her sides. "He said love was useless without wealth, that I was wasting my life here." She shook her head, eyes flashing with old pain. "So forgive me if I don't trust men who come in here acting like they can fix everything. Especially men with money. Money ruins people. It ruined him. And it nearly ruined me." The words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Alex felt them cut deep, slicing through his carefully built disguise. She didn't know it, but every word condemned him. He was exactly the kind of man she despised, the heir to billions, a product of the wealth that had wrecked her trust. If she ever found out who he really was. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice to stay calm. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Isabella's gaze softened, just a little. "No one deserves that." For a moment silence fell again. But it wasn't empty, it was fragile, trembling with the weight of everything unsaid. Alex's fingers itched to reach across the counter to take her hand, to promise her he wasn't like Dominic, wasn't like the men who had hurt her. The truth burned on his tongue. "I'm Alexander Knight. I could make all of this go away with one phone call. I could pay off the debts, save the trattoria, give you the life you deserve." But he bit it back. Because if he told her now, it wouldn't be a gift. It would be a betrayal. So instead, he simply picked up the broom again, forcing his hands to move. "You're stronger than you think, Isabella." She gave him a long, unreadable look, then turned back to wiping the counter. Her shoulders eased, if only slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't know how to quit." The clock ticked past midnight. They finished the cleaning side by side. Their words few but their silences no longer hostile. When Isabella finally locked the front door, she turned to Alex, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "Thanks," she said simply. "For what?" "For staying," she replied. Then she walked away, leaving him standing under the flickering sign of Daniel Trattoria, heart aching with secrets he could not share. Chapter 9: Shadows on the Horizon. Daniel Trattoria had not felt this alive in years. By the end of the week, the once empty dining room now brimmed with life nearly every night. The tables rattled with laughter, forks scraped against plates, and Sophia zipped between booths with trays balanced precariously on her arms. Customers who hadn't stepped through the trattoria's doors in months or years returned after seeing a friend's photo online or a glowing comment on social media. Table 3 says they came all the way from the next town because of that pasta reel. Sophia crowed one evening, dropping off a slip of paper with orders scrawled across it. Her eyes sparkled as she darted back toward the kitchen, her phone buzzing in her pocket. Isabella wiped sweat from her brow, maneuvering pans across the stovetop. "Then let's make sure they leave wanting to come back." Alex hovered at the prep station, sleeves rolled high, a streak of flour smudging his cheek. He worked with a focus that surprised even him, slicing, stirring, ferrying dishes to tables when needed. Each night, he found himself moving more smoothly, blending into the rhythms of the trattoria's chaos. The clumsy stranger who had burned bread and broken glasses felt like another man entirely. "Not bad, city boy," Isabella teased one night as he plated bruschetta, the edges golden but not burned this time. Her eyes glinted with something dangerously close to pride. Alex smiled faintly, though inside, guilt twisted. Because even as he grew into this life, he knew it wasn't truly his. It was borrowed, fragile, built on a lie that could shatter with a single word. The trattoria's momentum grew, and with it, so did Isabella's hope. She worked harder than ever, but now there was a lightness in her step, a spark in her eyes. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the trattoria had a future. That hope lasted until the morning Sophia burst in with her phone clutched tight, her face pale. "Bella," she gasped. "Look at this." Isabella frowned, wiping her hands on a rag as she took the phone. On the glowing screen was an article from the city's business daily. "Night Hospitality acquires 5th independent restaurant this month." The headline alone was enough to send a chill through the kitchen. "They're buying up all the small places," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with both awe and fear. "Family spots. Just like ours." Isabella's jaw clenched, her knuckles whitening around the phone. "Of course it's night. Greedy bastards don't know when to stop." Alex froze, every muscle locking as though the words had been aimed directly at him. He forced his hands to keep moving, stacking plates, adjusting utensils, anything to avoid drawing attention to the guilt flooding his face. Isabella slammed the phone down on the counter. "This is exactly why places like ours don't survive. Because men in suits with more money than sense treat people's dreams like Monopoly pieces. Her voice rose, hot and fierce. My mother poured her soul into this trattoria. And people like Victor Knight would bulldoze it without blinking, just to make room for another sterile hotel restaurant. Alex swallowed hard, the words cutting deep. He wanted to tell her, wanted to say that he wasn't like his father, that not all men with money were the same. But the truth loomed, sharp and merciless. He was one of them. He was the son of Victor Knight, heir to the empire that was devouring her world. Bella, Sophia said carefully. They're not after us, are they? Isabella shook her head, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her doubt. Not yet. But if we ever pop up on their radar, she exhaled sharply, pressing her palms flat against the counter. No, I won't let it happen. Not to Mama's trattoria. I don't care if I have to chain myself to the front door. I won't let night hospitality touch us. Her words struck Alex like a blow. He gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles ached, his mind racing with what's. What if Victor had already noticed? What if the trattoria's revival, the very thing that gave Isabella hope, was the thing that made it a target? He could almost hear Victor's voice in his head. Weak businesses deserve to be swallowed. Only the strong survive. But here, in this kitchen with flour dust in the air and sauce simmering on the stove, Alex no longer believed that. Strength wasn't about swallowing others whole. It was about holding on together, even when the world tried to tear you apart. Still he said nothing. That night, after the doors were locked and the trattoria lay in silence, Alex lingered by the window, staring out at the darkened street. Isabella's words echoed in his mind. I won't let night hospitality touch us. He clenched his jaw, torn in two. Every day he remained silent, the lie grew heavier. And every day he considered telling her, the memory of her hatred for men like his father stopped him cold. Some truths, he realized, could destroy everything. And as the shadow of night hospitality stretched further across the city, Alex knew that sooner or later, the shadow would find its way to Isabella's door. Chapter 10. Dominic's Shadow. The dinner rush had just died down when Isabella saw him. She froze in place, dish towel in hand, as Dominic Hale stepped through the trattoria doors like he still belonged there. He hadn't changed much, still impeccably dressed, his suit cut razor-sharp, his smile polished until it gleamed. But Isabella knew better than anyone how thin that smile was, how much venom coiled beneath. Bella, he drawled, striding across the dining room with the casual arrogance of a man who never heard the word no. It's been too long. Her throat tightened. She hadn't heard that voice in nearly 2 years. Not since she'd hurled the engagement ring back in his face. And yet, just hearing it again, her stomach knotted with a mixture of anger and something dangerously close to fear. What are you doing here, Dominic? She asked, her voice sharp, brittle. He gestured vaguely to the bustling room, where a few lingering diners sipped their wine. Word on the street is Daniels is making a comeback. I had to see it for myself. Imagine my surprise, it's true. His eyes swept the room, calculating before returning to her. Congratulations. Her grip tightened on the towel. Get to the point. Dominic's smile widened, shark-like. The point, my dear, is opportunity. You're standing on a goldmine, Isabella. A little investment capital to expand, modernize, advertise, and this place could be more than just a neighborhood trattoria. It could be a brand. I don't want a brand, she snapped. I want my mother's restaurant. He tilted his head, feigning sympathy. And how long do you think sentiment keeps the lights on? You've done well these past weeks, but we both know debt doesn't disappear just because the tables are full. One bad month and you'll be right back where you started. Her pulse hammered, but she forced her voice steady. We'll manage. Without you. For the first time, Dominic's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, calculating. You've always been stubborn. He leaned in, lowering his voice. But remember this, Bella's stubbornness doesn't save you. Money does. And when you finally realize that, I'll be waiting. He straightened, smoothing his suit jacket. "Think about my offer." She glared at him, chest heaving, but said nothing. The silence itself was answer enough. Dominic smirked, unfazed. He gave a mock bow before sauntering out, leaving the faint scent of his cologne hanging in the air like poison. From the kitchen doorway, Alex watched the entire exchange. His fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. He wanted nothing more than to storm across the room, to tell Dominic to stay away, to protect Isabella from his smirk and his lies. But he couldn't, not without risking everything. Not yet. Across town, the night hospitality boardroom buzzed with tension. Victor Knight sat at the head of the long table, eyes scanning the thick portfolio in front of him. Each tab represented another acquisition: a family-owned cafe in the East District, a mid-sized bistro by the river, a beloved bakery in the Old Quarter. All of them had once been proud independents. Now they were Knight properties. "Gentlemen, ladies," Victor began smoothly, "our strategy remains unchanged. We identify struggling but promising establishments. We acquire. We expand. We profit. And the city learns once again that night hospitality is the inevitable future." Nods circled the room. An investor flipped a page in his own portfolio. Next on the list, Daniel's Trattoria. Modest size, but they've begun gaining traction in the last 2 weeks. Social media buzz, local attention. Not a big player yet, but with their publicity, they're ripe for takeover. Victor's gaze sharpened, interest flickering. "Daniel's." He repeated the name slowly, rolling it on his tongue. "Yes," another board member confirmed. "Small family run. Recently revived. Could be molded into a profitable chain concept. Early investment, early return." Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Then his mouth curved into the faintest of smiles. "Let's get it," he said simply. The words sealed Isabella's fate, though she had no idea yet. Later that night, Dominic Hale slipped into the shadows of a side street, his mind humming with possibility. He had lingered long enough at the trattoria to catch a glimpse of the man trailing behind Isabella in the kitchen, flour on his cheek, apron tied haphazardly. At first he'd thought nothing of it. Just another desperate worker clinging to a paycheck. But then the light caught the man's face. And Dominic's smile sharpened. Alexander Knight. The prodigal heir, dressed like a pauper, hiding in plain sight. The irony was so rich it nearly made Dominic laugh out loud. He lingered in the shadows, lips curling into a smirk. "Alexander Knight," he murmured, savoring the name. "Hiding in an apron. This will be fun." Chapter 11, Poisoned Words. The trattoria had grown busier by the day, but Isabella couldn't ignore the shadow that had crept back into her life. Dominic Hale. Since his reappearance, he had become a lingering presence, dropping by under the guise of casual visits, a glass of wine in hand, offering friendly advice. Isabella told herself she didn't need him, didn't want him, but still his words clung to her long after he left. Tonight was no different. He sat at the counter, immaculate as ever in a slate-gray suit, swirling a glass of Chianti like he owned the place. Isabella worked furiously in the kitchen, trying to pretend he wasn't there. But his voice carried, smooth and deliberate, each word sharpened like a knife. "So tell me, Bella," Dominic began, his gaze flicking toward the kitchen doorway where Alex darted past with a tray of dishes. "Who's the new help?" Isabella didn't look up from her chopping board. "A kitchen hand. That's all you need to know." Dominic's lips curved. "Is that so? Funny. He doesn't strike me as the type who spent much time with dish rags and aprons. Soft hands. Expensive posture. It's almost as if..." He paused, savoring the thought. "As if he's pretending." Her knife froze mid-chop, heart tightening. She forced herself to keep moving. "You don't know him." "No," Dominic conceded smoothly. "But do you? Really?" He sipped his wine, eyes glittering. A man like that, drifting in off the street, no history, no references, no past he'll talk about. Doesn't that worry you, Bella? She bristled. You don't get to call me that anymore. Fair enough, he said, unfazed. But you know I'm right. Haven't you learned by now? People hide things. Especially men who swoop in at just the right time, whispering ideas, acting like saviors. Where do you think he learned those tricks? Isabella's chest ached. Against her will, Dominic's words tugged at wounds that hadn't fully healed. She had trusted once before, trusted Dominic, trusted his promises, trusted that he loved her. And she had paid the price. Don't, she muttered, her voice low. Don't compare him to you. Dominic leaned back, smirk never fading. I don't have to. The parallels are there. I just don't want you to get burned twice. He drained the rest of his wine, then set the glass down with deliberate care. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe your mystery man is exactly who he says he is. His eyes flicked toward Alex, who was bent over wiping a table. If only he'd ever actually said who that is. Before Isabella could snap back, Alex appeared at the counter. He eyed Dominic warily, jaw tight. Done with your drink? Dominic smiled, sliding the empty glass toward him. Delightful, thank you. His gaze lingered on Alex just a second too long. You're fitting in nicely. Almost as if you were born to this. Alex's eyes narrowed, reading the unspoken challenge in Dominic's tone. But he said nothing. He couldn't. Not without revealing himself. When Dominic finally left, Isabella exhaled shakily, pressing her palms against the counter. Don't listen to him, Alex said quietly, catching the look on her face. She hesitated, searching his eyes. Do you have secrets, Alex? The question hung heavy in the air. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Everyone does, he said at last, his voice soft. It wasn't enough. She wanted more, but he couldn't give it. Not yet. And as she turned back to the stove, her hands trembling just slightly, Alex felt the wedge Dominic had driven between them sink deeper. Chapter 12. Sparks in the kitchen. The trattoria was quiet after closing, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the dimly lit kitchen. Isabella was bent over the counter, rolling out dough, strands of hair falling loose from her bun. Alex stood opposite her, sleeves rolled high, dusted with flour that clung to his forearms. It had started innocently enough. Isabella had been testing a new idea for the menuet rustic flatbread her mother used to make, but when Alex wandered in to help, it turned into something else. Not like that, Isabella said, grabbing the rolling pin from his hands. She guided it across the dough in long, even strokes. You're pressing too hard. Alex smirked, leaning closer. Funny. You don't complain when I slice vegetables too thin. That's different. She rolled again, refusing to look up. This takes finesse. Which you don't have. Don't I? Before she could respond, Alex flicked a pinch of flour toward her, speckling her cheek. Isabella blinked, stunned, then narrowed her eyes. Oh, you did not just. But he had, and by the time she lunged for a handful of flour, Alex was already laughing, dodging around the counter. What followed was chaos. Flour in the air, laughter bouncing off the tiled walls, the smell of dough mingling with something sweeter, the sound of joy, rare and fleeting in the trattoria. At last, Isabella cornered him near the sink, cheeks flushed, apron streaked white. Truce? He asked, holding his hands up in mock surrender. She raised a brow. Only if you admit I'm the better chef. Fine, he said, grinning. You're the better chef. Happy. Ecstatic. But her lips curved into a smile despite herself. The laughter faded into something quieter, heavier. Isabella realized just how close they were, his shoulders only inches from hers. His eyes fixed on her with a softness that made her chest tighten. The silence stretched, fragile and electric. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible thread, Alex leaned closer. For one suspended heartbeat, Isabella didn't move. The warmth of him, the faint scent of flour and soap, the steady rise and fall of his breath, it all pulled her toward him. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of want and fear. But just as their lips nearly touched, Isabella jerked back. The spell shattered. She turned away, fumbling for the rolling pin. "We should finish the dough," she said quickly, her voice too bright, too brittle. Alex stood frozen, the ache of rejection settling heavy in his chest. He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Right. The dough." Isabella kept her back to him, pressing hard on the pin. She didn't trust herself to look at him, not when her hands were trembling and her heart was a mess of contradictions. She wanted him, God help her, she wanted him. But she remembered the sting of Dominic's betrayal, the way her trust had been shattered. She couldn't let herself fall again. Not for another man with secrets. And Alex had secrets, she felt it in her bones. He, meanwhile, watched her shoulders tighten, knowing he had caused that hesitation. He wanted to tell her everything, to strip away the lies and show her who he really was. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not while his father's shadow loomed and Dominic lurked like a vulture. So he picked up the flour-dusted bowl, forcing his voice steady. "You know," he said softly, "for someone who claims not to need help, you laugh a lot when I'm around." She didn't turn. But he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, the ghost of a smile she tried to hide. And though the kiss never came, the air between them remained charged, carrying sparks that neither of them could deny. Chapter 13, Sophia's Suspicions. The trattoria hummed with a familiar symphony of clattering dishes, sizzling pans, and laughter spilling from the dining room. It was another busy evening, the kind Isabella had begun to dream of after months of scraping by. She worked with her usual determined energy, darting between stove and counter, while Alex moved through the kitchen with a quiet steadiness that had surprised everyone since his arrival. Everyone except Sophia. Isabella's younger cousin had sharp eyes and a sharper instinct for reading people. Where her father Richard tended to judge on first impressions, and Isabella often gave people the benefit of the doubt, Sophia noticed the small things. And with Alex, she had noticed plenty. Tonight, as she chopped basil at the prep station, her gaze flicked to his wrist. The watch he wore was simple in design, almost understated, but the moment she caught the gleam of its face, her breath hitched. She knew that brand. Knew it because she had once scrolled through an article about the world's most exclusive timepieces, dreaming of a future where Daniel's trattoria was thriving enough that she could afford luxuries beyond necessity. The model on Alex's wrist had cost more than their monthly rent. Her knife slowed. He hadn't worn it every day, she realized. In fact, he had kept it tucked away most of the time, but tonight when he rolled up his sleeves, there it was, unmistakable, shimmering under the fluorescent kitchen lights. Her suspicion, long nagging in the back of her mind, sharpened to certainty. Later, when the last customers had trickled out and Isabella was tallying receipts at the register, Sophia caught Alex alone at the sink, sleeves wet from rinsing glasses. She approached quietly, arms folded. "You're not who you say you are," she said softly. Alex stiffened, the glass slipping slightly in his hand. He turned, forcing a smile. "What do you mean?" "I've told you I'm just a guy looking for work." Sophia shook her head. "No. Guys looking for work don't wear a watch worth more than this entire restaurant. They don't know how to pronounce French vintages correctly without hesitation. And they definitely don't move like someone who's been trained to command a room." His mask faltered for the briefest second. Enough for her to see it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I don't know what your game is, but Isabella has been through enough. If you hurt her, if you turn out to be just another rich man who thinks he can play with her heart, I swear, Alex, I'll expose you myself." The words landed like a knife. Alex opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He couldn't defend himself without revealing everything, and the timing wasn't right. So he swallowed, nodded once, and turned back to the sink, scrubbing harder than necessary. The next morning, Sophia cornered Isabella in the pantry while they were restocking flour. "Bella," she began, hesitating, "I need to talk to you about Alex." Isabella frowned, brushing her hands on her apron. "What about him?" Sophia crossed her arms. "Don't you think it's strange? He shows up out of nowhere, no past, no family he talks about. And then there are the little things. His watch. The way he speaks. The way he—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "He doesn't belong here, Bella. He's pretending to be something he's not." Isabella's chest tightened. For a moment doubt flickered. But then she remembered Alex's hands covered in flour, his laugh in the kitchen, the quiet way he listened when she spoke about her mother. The thought of Sophia tearing that apart made her bristle. "Enough, Sophia," she snapped. "You don't know him. You don't see the way he works, the way he cares. He's not perfect, but he's here when we need him. That's more than I can say for most people." Sophia's face softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Bella, I'm not saying he hasn't helped. I'm saying you need to protect yourself. Haven't we learned what happens when you trust too easily?" The reminder stung. Dominic's shadow was never far from her thoughts. But Isabella shook her head. "Alex isn't Dominic. You don't know that," Sophia whispered. "I do," Isabella insisted, though her voice wavered. "I feel it." Sophia sighed, realizing she couldn't push further without risking a rift. "Fine. But just be careful. Please." She left Isabella alone in the pantry, clutching a sack of flour, heart hammering. That night, as Isabella wiped down tables after closing, she caught Alex watching her from the kitchen doorway. His eyes lingered, full of something heavy, regret, maybe even fear. For the first time, she wondered if Sophia was right, if there were layers to him she hadn't uncovered. But then he smiled faintly, a weary smile that melted her doubts, and she smiled back despite herself. Alex turned away quickly, hiding the storm inside him. Sophia was right. He didn't belong here. But for Isabella's sake, he had to pretend a little longer, even if every lie brought him closer to losing her. Chapter 14: A Taste of Success. The morning sun streamed through the trattoria windows, catching in the dust motes that floated lazily above the tables. Isabella wiped down the counter with a humming energy she hadn't felt in years. Business had been improving, yes, but last night something extraordinary had happened. A woman with oversized glasses and a notebook had come in for dinner. She had ordered half the menu, asked a dozen questions, and scribbled furiously between bites. Isabella hadn't thought much of it until she caught the familiar logo on the woman's phone case. Foodie's Fork, one of the city's most influential food blogs. This morning, Isabella's phone buzzed nonstop. The article headline gleamed across the screen. "Hidden Gem. Daniel's Trattoria redefines comfort dining." Her heart hammered as she skimmed the piece. Words like authentic, heartfelt, soulful jumped out at her. The blogger praised the rustic flavors, the family atmosphere, and even mentioned the unexpectedly charming young kitchen hand who brings an earnest energy to the room. Isabella nearly dropped the phone. They meant Alex. By lunchtime, the trattoria was packed. Couples squeezed into corner tables. Office workers lingered over pasta. Families filled the room with chatter. The phone rang endlessly with reservations. Sophia darted between tables with menus. Richard tried to keep the books balanced while also greeting customers, and Isabella commanded the kitchen with fire in her veins. Alex moved everywhere at once, carrying trays, chopping vegetables, filling water glasses. He looked exhausted, but every time Isabella caught his eye, they shared a smile, the kind that said, "We're doing this together." As she slid a tray of golden lasagna onto the counter, Isabella felt her chest swell. For the first time in years, she believed her mother's trattoria might actually survive. She whispered under her breath, "We're back, Mama." Across town, in a sleek boardroom high above the city, Victor Knight slammed a report onto the polished table. The board members fell silent, watching him with uneasy eyes. "A food blog," Victor snarled. "A food blog is where my son resurfaces. In a dingy trattoria with peeling paint. One of the directors cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, the restaurant is drawing attention. That publicity could complicate our expansion strategy in the district." Victor's glare silenced him. He turned to the tall man seated at the far end of the table. "Harold. His discreet fixer. Find out everything. Where he sleeps, what he does, who he's with. I want reports by the hour." Harold nodded, his expression unreadable. Victor leaned back, jaw clenched. It wasn't just that Alex had humiliated him by vanishing. It wasn't just that investors whispered about instability in the night empire. It was the insult the heir to his billion-dollar legacy playing kitchen boy in some run-down family trattoria. And worse, getting close to a woman who was not of their world. Victor's voice dropped, cold and venomous. If he thinks he can throw his future away for some apron-wearing nobody, he is mistaken. That evening, among the wave of new customers, one stood out. He arrived alone, dressed casually, blending in with the crowd. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. He ordered a modest plate of pasta and a glass of house wine, asking nothing unusual. Still he watched as Isabella flitted between kitchen and dining room, her smile glowing despite the chaos. Watched as Alex bent down to help a child who dropped a spoon, earning the parents' grateful laughter. Watched as their gazes lingered on each other just a little too long, a little too warm. When the man left, he dropped a generous tip and slipped quietly into the night. Hours later, Victor's phone buzzed with a message. He read the report, his face darkening with every line. "The trattoria is thriving. The girl Isabella is central to it. And your son is devoted to her." Victor's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. He rose, pacing his office window, staring at the glittering skyline below. So that's it. Woman. Restaurant. That's what he throws away everything for. He turned, his reflection in the glass sharp and merciless. "Then I'll take it all from him," he whispered. Back at the trattoria, Isabella and Alex collapsed into chairs after the last customer left, exhaustion pulling at their limbs. But they were smiling, breathless with the rush of a day that felt like a miracle. "Did you see that family from out of town?" Isabella said, grinning. "They said they found us because of the blog." Alex chuckled, rubbing his sore shoulders. "I've never seen this place so alive." For a moment, in the quiet warmth of the empty trattoria, Isabella let herself imagine a future where this lasted. A future where Alex was by her side. Neither of them knew that across the city, Victor Knight had already set his sights on tearing it all apart. Chapter 15. At the family table. The trattoria was finally quiet after a day that had stretched everyone to the limit. Chairs were stacked, counters scrubbed, and the lingering smell of garlic and roasted tomatoes hung in the air like a comforting blanket. Isabella set aside her apron and stretched, wincing at the ache in her back. "Come on," Richard said gruffly, though his eyes held warmth. "One long shift deserves one proper dinner." He motioned for everyone to sit, and before Alex could slip away to wash another dish, Sophia tugged him toward the table. "You've worked just as hard as the rest of us. Sit." Alex hesitated, unused to the invitation, but Isabella smiled and patted the chair beside her. He sat, and soon the table filled with steaming plates. A simple salad, leftover pasta, roasted chicken that Richard had insisted on making as a treat. It wasn't extravagant, but the aromas wrapped around Alex like a hug. They ate, and slowly laughter bubbled up. Richard complained about the blogger who'd photographed her plate before eating. Food is meant to be eaten hot, not posed for like a supermodel. And Sophia teased Isabella about the flour still streaking her cheek. Even Isabella laughed, tossing a napkin at her cousin, her eyes sparkling in a way Alex had never seen when she was burdened with worry. He sat back for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. This, he realized, was what he had never known in all his years surrounded by crystal chandeliers and servants in pressed uniforms. Night family dinners had been formal performances, where silence was expected unless spoken to, where the food was plated like art but tasted of nothing but cold perfection. Here, in this modest trattoria, laughter echoed against old brick walls, and the food, though simple, was made with love so palpable Alex could almost taste it. Isabella caught him watching and arched a brow. "What?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing. Just this. It's nice." Her expression softened, and for a heartbeat, she looked at him as if she saw through his walls. He dropped his gaze, guilt burning in his chest. They welcomed him as family, but he wasn't who they thought he was. Every laugh, every smile, every flicker of trust was another thread in a web of lies. He twirled his fork through the pasta, appetite fading under the weight of the secret pressing against his ribs. Miles away, in an office that gleamed with glass and steel, Victor Knight leaned over a set of papers on his desk. His financial team had been thorough. Daniel's trattoria. Debt analysis. Victor scanned the columns of numbers with clinical precision. Outstanding loans, overdue supplier payments, rent on the edge of default. On paper, the trattoria's revival was nothing more than a mirage. Beneath the sudden wave of publicity and hopeful crowds, it was crumbling. Victor's lips curled. Perfect. He picked up his glass of scotch, swirling it slowly as he stared out at the glittering skyline. His son thought he could disappear into some hole-in-the-wall kitchen, thought he could find love with a woman who belonged to another world. But Victor knew better. Everyone had a price. Every dream had a weak point. And he had just found Isabella Daniel's. Debt, he murmured to himself. The oldest chain in the book. He turned back to Harold, who stood waiting. Make contact with their landlord. With their suppliers. Quietly. I want pressure applied from every side. And when she's at her breaking point dash. His mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'll swoop in as the savior. Then Alex will see the truth. He'll come crawling back. Harold inclined his head. And if he doesn't? Victor's smile hardened into steel. Then I'll bury that restaurant and the girl with it. Back at the trattoria, Isabella clinked glasses with her family, her laughter warm and unguarded. Alex forced himself to join in, to smile, to act like nothing was wrong. But as he looked around the table, he felt the gnawing guilt sink deeper. He knew whether tomorrow, next week, or next month, that Victor Knight's shadow would find its way here. And when it did, all this warmth, all this hope, would be the first thing torn apart. And it would be his fault. Chapter 16. The Corporate Storm. The trattoria was alive with the chatter of new customers, the air thick with the smell of garlic, rosemary, and simmering tomatoes. For the first time in years, Isabella felt like they were riding a wave instead of drowning beneath it. She wiped sweat from her brow, stole a quick glance at Alex stacking plates, and allowed herself the smallest smile. Then Sophia's phone buzzed. She frowned, scanning the notification. Her face drained of color. "Bella," she whispered, rushing to the counter. "What is it?" Isabella asked, still slicing bread. Sophia held out her phone. The screen glared with a headline from the city's financial news outlet. Victor Knight expands hospitality empire. Eyes local acquisition Daniel's trattoria among targets. Isabella's knife clattered against the cutting board. She grabbed the phone, her eyes racing over the article. It was all there. Victor Knight announcing his latest campaign to revitalize small restaurants, naming several properties his corporation intended to buy. And in bold print, nestled between two other names, was hers. Daniel's trattoria. Her throat closed. The words blurred as her vision filled with hot tears. "He's not taking this," she whispered. "Not this. Not Mama's place." Around her, the restaurant noise faded into a hush as murmurs spread. Customers glanced at their phones, some whispering sympathetically, others curiously. The weight of eyes pressed in from every direction, and Isabella suddenly felt stripped bare. Her family's struggle broadcast for the world to consume. She slammed the phone down, her chest heaving. He can't do this. He can't just take what isn't his. Richard came from the kitchen, reading the headline over her shoulder. His face paled, then flushed with fury. That bastard! But Isabella couldn't hold her composure. She broke, tears spilling as she stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter. First Mama dies, then Dominic nearly destroys us, and now this vulture wants to take the last piece of her I have left. Sophia wrapped her arms around her, but Isabella shoved away, her grief sharp as broken glass. Alex stood frozen, every word cutting him deeper than a knife. His father's name on Isabella's lips was venom, her hatred so raw it shook the walls. And he was Victor Knight's son. His hands trembled as he gripped a chair for support, guilt clawing up his throat. He wanted to tell her. God, he wanted to tell her everything. But what would it do? She'd look at him and see betrayal. She'd never forgive him. That night, after the doors closed and the trattoria was silent, Isabella sat alone at one of the tables, her head in her hands. The article was spread open on her phone, the glowing screen a cruel reminder. Alex approached slowly, a mug of tea in his hands. He set it gently before her. Here. You should drink something warm. She lifted her red, tear-stained eyes to him. Why does it always have to be him? Why does Victor Knight ruin everything he touches? Her voice cracked on the name, and she crumpled again, shoulders shaking. Alex knelt beside her, his chest aching. Bella, he whispered, reaching to brush her hair back from her face. His touch lingered, gentle, aching to take away her pain. She grabbed his hand, clutching it tightly as though anchoring herself. He's a monster, Alex. He doesn't care about people, about families. All he sees is profit. If he takes this place, it'll be like Mama died all over again. Her tears fell hot onto their joined hands. Alex swallowed hard, guilt choking him. Every word she spoke was a dagger, every sob an accusation. And he deserved it, even if she didn't know why. Because the monster she despised was his father. And by blood, by name, he was part of that same world. He squeezed her hand, forcing steadiness into his voice though his soul trembled. He won't take it, Bella. Not as long as you fight. And I'll fight with you. She searched his face, her tearful eyes full of fragile hope. Promise me. He nodded, even as the lie burned in his chest. I promise. She leaned against him then, her head on his shoulder, sobbing quietly as he held her. He pressed his cheek against her hair, inhaling the scent of rosemary and flower, and closed his eyes. If she ever discovered who he truly was, this comfort would shatter into ashes. But for tonight, he let himself hold her, even as guilt gnawed at his bones. And somewhere, in a penthouse of steel and glass, Victor Knight raised a glass of scotch to the city skyline, already planning his next move. Chapter 17. Refusing Dominic. The trattoria lights burned late, but the mood inside was far from celebratory. Isabella stood at the counter, flipping through a stack of invoices with trembling hands. The supplier's notes were sharper now, late payment penalties, urgent settlement required. And earlier that afternoon, their landlord had appeared unannounced, reminding her with veiled politeness that rent was overdue. Each demand was like a tightening chain around her throat. She knew what it meant. Someone was pulling strings. And she knew who. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she refused to cry again. Not tonight. She stacked the papers, forced a steady breath, and turned toward the door. That was when she saw him. Dominic Hale. He leaned casually against the doorframe, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit. His smile was polished, but his eyes glinted with something harder, satisfaction at finding her cornered. Evening, Bella, he said smoothly, as if years hadn't passed since he shattered her trust. Her jaw tightened. What do you want? He strolled inside, ignoring the sharpness of her tone. I heard about your difficulties. Landlords breathing down your neck. Suppliers turning impatient. Shame, really. This place has so much history. So much potential. She crossed her arms, bracing herself. Spare me the theatrics, Dominic. Get to the point. His smile widened. The point is, I can help you. I have the resources, the contacts. One signature from me, and your debts vanish. The trattoria thrives. You won't have to lift a finger. And in return, she asked, her voice low. His gaze lingered on her, uncomfortably intimate. In return, you and I rebuild what we lost. As partners. In business, of course. And perhaps more. Her stomach twisted. So that's it. You swoop in like a knight, pretending to save me, only to shackle me to you again. He stepped closer, his cologne sharp in the air. I'm offering you survival, Bella. This restaurant is drowning. You can't fight men like Victor Knight. But I can. With me you'd be protected. Without me. His smile turned cold. Without me you'll lose everything. Her hands trembled, but her voice rose, steady and fierce. I would rather lose everything than sell myself to you. I won't make the same mistake twice. Not for this place, not for anyone. The words struck him like a slap. For the first time, his charming mask slipped, revealing the bitterness underneath. His eyes darkened, his lips thinning into a line. Careful, he murmured. You think you're standing on solid ground, but I can see the cracks forming beneath your feet. And when it all collapses, don't expect your apron-wearing savior to catch you. At the mention of Alex, Isabella stiffened. She followed Dominic's gaze through the window. Alex was stacking chairs. His shirt dusted with flour, laughter soft as he teased Sophia. Dominic's jaw clenched. Jealousy burned in his eyes. Unbelievable. You've fallen for him. Isabella turned back, defiant. Stay out of my life, Dominic. You've done enough damage. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Dominic's smirk returned, cruel and patient. Fine. Refuse me. But remember this, Bella. Men like him always have secrets. And when his comes out, I'll be there to watch you break. He left without another word, the bell above the door chiming softly as it closed. Later that night, Victor Knight sat in his penthouse office, swirling a glass of scotch as Harold delivered his report. The landlord has issued final notice. Suppliers demand payment within the week. Pressure is mounting as you instructed. Victor nodded slowly, satisfaction curling his lips. Good. It won't be long before she folds. When she does, she'll have no choice but to accept my offer. And Alex, he sneered the name. Alex will learn what happens when you defy me. Back at the trattoria, Isabella extinguished the last light and leaned against the counter, fighting the knot in her chest. She had refused Dominic. She had stood her ground. But his words echoed in her mind, poisonous and sharp. Men like him always have secrets. Her gaze drifted toward the kitchen where Alex had just finished wiping the counters. His smile weary but warm. The sight of him softened her heart, steadying her resolve. Still, somewhere in the shadows outside, Dominic watched with narrowed eyes. His fury simmered, his jealousy feeding the dangerous thought that he now held the key to destroying them both. And he would wait patient, ruthless for the perfect moment to strike. Chapter 19: A Taste of Tomorrow. The trattoria's usual rhythm had slowed after the storm of Victor's announcement. Bills still pressed against Isabella's mind, but for once, she wasn't wearing the exhaustion on her face. Tonight she had agreed, reluctantly at first, to step away from the restaurant for a few hours. Alex had invited her. They walked side by side down a quiet stretch of cobblestone street, the city glowing in warm lamplight. Isabella wore a simple dress, hair loose around her shoulders, and Alex, though dressed casually in jeans and a button-up, looked at her as though she were more dazzling than the skyline itself. "Are you sure this isn't taking you away from important work?" she teased. "You've become practically indispensable at the trattoria, clumsy hands and all. He grinned, shoving his hands in his pockets. I can afford one night off. Besides, even superheroes need to recharge. Superheroes. You're comparing yourself to Superman now. Well, he said, feigning seriousness. He worked under a secret identity too. She laughed, and for a second Alex's heart clenched. The irony of his words stung, but her laughter was worth it. His apartment was small, tucked above a laundromat. Isabella blinked when he opened the door, her gaze sweeping over the modest space. A small couch, a scarred coffee table, a kitchenette barely big enough for two. It was a far cry from the gleaming towers Victor Knight called home. It's cozy, she said gently, stepping inside. Alex rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. It's not much, but it's mine. No one telling me how to live here. No board meetings. No staff tiptoeing around. Just me. She walked to the window, glancing at the view of neon signs and traffic lights below. Sometimes freedom is worth more than space. When she turned, their eyes met. Something soft passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. They ended up on the couch, sharing takeout he'd picked up from a corner noodle shop. Isabella teased him for spilling sauce on his shirt, and he countered with exaggerated tales of his kitchen heroics. The laughter faded into a quieter rhythm, a warmth that lingered even after the food was gone. At one point, she leaned her head on his shoulder. His breath caught, his heart hammering. He wanted achingly to tilt his head, to press a kiss into her hair, to confess who he really was. But fear chained him. Instead, he whispered, I don't know what I'd do without you. She tilted her face toward him, eyes glimmering with something that looked a lot like the feelings he'd buried deep. You don't have to find out. The moment stretched, fragile, their lips inches apart. Then she pulled back, clearing her throat. Tomorrow's the food festival. We should get some sleep. Alex swallowed the ache of what might have been and nodded. Yeah, tomorrow. The city's annual food festival burst alive the next morning with colors, music, and the scent of sizzling dishes. Stalls lined the square, banners flapping in the breeze, crowds bustling from one taste to another. Daniel's trattoria had a modest booth, nothing flashy, just a wooden table dressed with red and white checkered cloths, steaming trays of pasta, and a chalkboard menu Sophia had decorated with curly script. At first, Isabella worried they'd be overshadowed by bigger names with glossy displays. But then a food blogger camera in hand stopped by. She tried Isabella's handmade gnocchi, closed her eyes in delight, and declared loudly, "This is the best thing I've tasted all day." It was like a spark catching fire. Soon, a line stretched from their booth, laughter and chatter filling the air as customers returned for seconds. Children tugged on parents' hands, eager for more garlic bread. Strangers snapped photos and tagged the trattoria's name online. Isabella worked the booth with radiant energy, flour dusting her arms, her eyes glowing brighter than Alex had ever seen. "This," she said breathlessly between orders, "this is what Mama dreamed of. People coming together, loving the food, feeling like family. It's happening, Alex. It's really happening." Alex watched her, his chest swelling with pride and something deeper, more dangerous. She didn't see it, the way she shone, the way she breathed life into the trattoria, the way she made strangers feel at home with nothing more than her smile. To him, she wasn't just saving her mother's dream. She was saving him. As the sun dipped lower, the booth still buzzed with life, customers chatting about Daniel's trattoria as though it were already a city staple. Isabella leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her brow, her laughter soft and full of hope. "We did it," she whispered. Alex stood beside her, resisting the urge to take her hand in front of everyone. "No," he said quietly. "You did it." She turned to him, eyes shining with unshed tears, this time of joy, not grief. "For the first time, I feel like maybe we'll survive." Alex smiled, though the guilt inside him twisted sharper than ever. Because he knew the storm wasn't over. His father was still out there waiting to strike. Dominic was lurking, jealousy growing. And his own secret was a ticking clock. But tonight none of that mattered. Tonight, Isabella was glowing with triumph, and Alex let himself believe, for just a little while, that they had a future. Chapter 20. The mask torn off. The festival square glittered beneath strings of lights, music floating over the crowd as the last of the evening sun painted the city in gold. Daniel's trattoria's booth was still buzzing, customers praising the food, snapping photos, calling Isabella a rising star. For Isabella it was a dream made flesh. She leaned against the booth counter, laughter spilling from her lips as she watched a child twirl with a breadstick like a prize. Hope, real tangible hope, throbbed in her chest. "This is it," she told Alex, her eyes shimmering. "Mama's dream is alive." Alex smiled, though his heart ached. He wanted to hold her, to tell her she deserved the world. But the words stuck in his throat, weighed down by the secret he carried like a chain. Applause rippled nearby. A small stage had been set for closing announcements, and the festival's host was thanking vendors, praising the creativity of the city's chefs. Isabella's name was even mentioned, drawing cheers from the crowd. She flushed, glancing at Alex, who clapped the loudest. And then, from the edge of the stage, a familiar figure appeared. Dominic Hale. Impeccable suit. Confident smile. Eyes glinting with malice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, striding up uninvited, taking the microphone with an ease born of arrogance. "Before this wonderful evening ends, I think it's only fair the truth comes out." The host stammered, trying to intervene, but Dominic's presence commanded the crowd. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Isabella stiffened at the booth, her hand gripping the counter. Alex's pulse quickened. Dominic's smile was sharp as glass. He gestured grandly toward Alex. "You've all fallen in love with this touching story, haven't you? A struggling trattoria, a brave daughter keeping her mother's dream alive, and the mysterious young man who appeared to help her." He paused, letting the suspense thicken. "But here's the twist you didn't see coming." He turned, eyes locking with Isabella's before cutting to Alex. "Your humble kitchen hand isn't who he says he is. His name isn't Alex Reed. It's Alexander Knight. Yes, that Knight. The heir to Knight International. The son of Victor Knight himself. The very man now circling Daniel's trattoria like a vulture." Gasps erupted. Phones rose into the air, recording every second. Whispers hissed through the crowd. Isabella's blood drained from her face. She turned slowly to Alex, her lips parting, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dominic wasn't done. His voice rose, triumphant. "He's been lying to you all, hiding in plain sight, playing the role of the poor, clumsy helper. But make no mistake, this isn't some fairy tale romance. This is manipulation. This is betrayal." The crowd roared with speculation. Some gasped. Others scoffed. Few jeered. Alex's chest constricted. He stepped forward, hands raised as if he could physically hold back the tide. "Bella!" Her eyes locked on him, shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. "Is it true?" Her voice was soft, almost lost beneath the noise. The truth he had buried, the mask he had worn, lay shattered at his feet. He opened his mouth, desperate to explain, to beg her to understand. "I never meant to hurt you. I just—" Her voice cut through him like a blade. "You lied to me." The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, but they carried more force than any scream. She stepped back, trembling, her hand clutching her apron as though it could shield her from the blow. Her eyes, once warm with trust, were filled with anguish and betrayal. Dominic's smirk deepened. Around them, the crowd buzzed with scandal, recording every second of the unraveling. "Bella, please." Alex reached for her, his heart breaking. But she wrenched away, her voice breaking as she cried, "Stay away from me." And then she turned, storming through the crowd, shoving past stunned strangers, her tears falling freely now. "Isabella!" Alex's voice cracked, but she didn't look back. The crowd parted around her, the sound of whispers and camera clicks chasing her into the night. Alex stood frozen, his chest hollow, his mask torn away for the world to see. Around him, Dominic's laughter rang like a cruel bell, savoring the chaos he'd unleashed. And in that moment, as Isabella disappeared into the crowd, Alex knew he had lost everything. Chapter 21. Broken Plates. The trattoria had never felt so cold. The laughter that once spilled across the tables was gone, replaced by the low hum of gossiping voices. Every whisper seemed to carry Isabella's name, her restaurant, and the scandal that now clung to her like a shadow. The chef with the billionaire in disguise. No wonder they suddenly got attention. She must have known. Plates clattered in the kitchen, harsher than usual, each crash a reflection of Isabella's mood. She moved with sharp, clipped gestures, her face drawn and pale. The festival's triumph, which should have been her brightest moment, now felt like a cruel memory. Alex stood at the kitchen door, his apron wrinkled, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He had tried to call her, to corner her for a conversation, but Isabella shut him out at every turn. Now, watching her, he felt the weight of his silence, his deception pressing down like chains. "Bella, please," he tried, his voice low, careful not to invite more whispers from the staff. She didn't look at him. Instead, she slammed a ladle into a pot, broth splashing over the rim. "Don't call me that." The words sliced sharper than knives. "Isabella." Finally she turned, eyes blazing through unshed tears. "You lied to me. Every single moment you stood beside me you pretended. You watched me pour my heart into this place, you heard me rail against men like your father, and all the while you—" Her voice broke. "You were him. His blood. His shadow." Alex stepped forward, desperate, his hands trembling. "I am not my father. I never wanted you to see me as Alexander Knight. I wanted you to see me, just me. The man who burned bread on his first day, who stayed up cleaning the kitchen with you, who—" His voice faltered. "Who loves you?" Silence pressed in. Isabella stared at him, her chest rising and falling. For a fleeting second, doubt flickered in her gaze. But then, like a shutter slamming closed, her expression hardened. "Love built on lies isn't love, Alex." She yanked off her apron and hurled it onto the counter. A stack of plates wobbled, then toppled, crashing to the ground in a shower of porcelain shards. The sound echoed through the emptying trattoria like thunder. Everyone in the room froze. Isabella's hands shook, but she held her chin high, eyes locked on him. "We're done. Whatever this was, whatever I thought it could be. It's over." The words stole the breath from his lungs. He wanted to reach for her, to beg her to take them back, but the shards at his feet seemed to form an invisible wall between them. Her father, Richard, stepped into the kitchen, confusion written across his face. "Isabella!" She shook her head, cutting him off, and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the walls. Alex remained rooted in place, staring at the broken plates glinting under the kitchen lights. His reflection shimmered in the jagged pieces, fragmented just like his world. Outside, the trattoria buzzed with rumors. Customers whispered at their tables, some already standing to leave, shaking their heads with disapproval. The revival that had begun so brightly was crumbling, poisoned by scandal. In the far corner, Dominic sat at a table, a glass of wine in hand. His lips curled in a satisfied smirk. He had orchestrated this fracture, and now he savored every moment of its unraveling. As Alex finally stooped to gather the shattered porcelain, his fingers cut on a sharp edge, blood beading at his skin. He didn't flinch. Pain was fitting. Pain was all he deserved. And above it all, Dominic's gaze lingered like a predator circling its prey. He Empire Victor had built brick by ruthless brick. Chapter 22. Breaking Chains. Victor Knight's office was a cathedral of glass and steel, perched high above the city like a throne of power. The skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a constant reminder of the Empire Victor had built brick by ruthless brick. Alex stood before the massive desk, shoulders squared, hands clenched at his sides. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a boy cowering under the weight of his father's shadow. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a decision that would define him. Victor didn't look up right away. He signed a document with precise strokes, the scratch of his pen loud in the cavernous silence. Only then did he raise his cold, calculating gaze. "So," Victor said, voice clipped, "you've come crawling back." "I'm not crawling," Alex replied. His voice was steady, even though his chest thundered with nerves. "I'm done hiding, father. I'm here to tell you I'm finished with the company, with the family name, with all of it." Victor's lips curved in something between amusement and contempt. "Finished?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? You are Alexander Knight. Your inheritance, your future, every door you've ever walked through. It exists because of me. Because of this name." Alex shook his head. "No, that name has been my prison. Every relationship I've ever had was poisoned by it. Every choice was suffocated by what you wanted. For once in my life, I'm making my own decision. I'm breaking free." Victor's jaw tightened. "Free?" His tone was razor-sharp. "You think freedom is living in squalor? Scrubbing pots in some rat-hole trattoria? Wasting your talents on pasta and sauce? That woman has infected your judgment." A spark flared in Alex's chest at the mention of Isabella. He stepped closer, eyes locked on his father's. "Don't you dare talk about her. Isabella has more honor in one breath than you've shown in your entire life. And you." His voice cracked with emotion he could barely contain. "You will never own her. And you will never own me again." The room fell silent. Victor's gaze darkened, his mask of composure faltering for a fleeting second. But he quickly recovered, standing and circling his desk like a predator. "You're a fool, Alexander. Walk out that door and you walk away from everything. No trust fund, no estate, no protection. When the world eats you alive, don't come back begging me to save you." Alex straightened, his breath steady. "I would rather starve on my own terms than feast on yours." Victor froze. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, maybe even pride, but it vanished as quickly as it came, buried under iron control. "Then go," Victor spat, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Go and see how long you last without my empire to prop you up." Alex nodded once. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door, every step feeling like another shackle snapping loose. His palms sweated, his heart pounded, but underneath it all surged something new, something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. As the door closed behind him, the office's suffocating air lifted from his lungs. He stepped into the corridor, empty-handed but unburdened, stripped of wealth yet rich in resolve. For the first time in his life, Alexander Knight belonged to no one, not even the Knight Empire. And though the world ahead looked uncertain, his path was his own. Chapter 23. Isabella's Stand. The trattoria had always been more than brick and mortar. To Isabella, it was the last living fragment of her mother's soul, carried in every simmering pot of sauce, every recipe written in her looping handwriting. But now, it felt as though the walls themselves were trembling under the weight of betrayal, debt, and greedy men circling like vultures. For days, she moved through the restaurant like a ghost, going through the motions in the kitchen while her heart twisted with hurt. Every corner reminded her of Alex, his clumsy first attempts at chopping onions, the quiet way he stayed late to scrub pots, the warmth in his eyes when she had confessed her scars. And every reminder cut deeper because all of it had been a lie. At least, that's what she told herself. One evening after closing, she sat at a table with her father Richard and her sister Sophia. The lights were dim, the smell of garlic still lingering in the air, the silence thick enough to choke. "We can't keep this up," Richard said, his voice weary. His hands, once strong and steady, now trembled slightly as he rubbed his temples. The debt is growing, the suppliers are restless. Maybe it's time to. No, Isabella's voice cut sharp, more forceful than she intended. Both Richard and Sophia looked at her in surprise. Her chest rose and fell as she leaned forward, her hands pressed flat against the table. We are not giving up. Not to Victor Knight, not to Dominic Hale, not to anyone. This trattoria is Mama's legacy, and I'll fight tooth and nail to keep it alive. Richard hesitated. But Bella, I mean it, she said, her eyes blazing. I don't care if I have to cook alone until my hands bleed, or if I have to knock on every door in this city for support. I will not let them take this place from us. Sophia reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Her younger sister's eyes glistened with tears, but they were tears of pride. That's the Isabella the first know. The words gave Isabella a strange comfort. For too long, she had let grief and betrayal weigh her down. But now, beneath the ache in her chest, something new was stirring: fury, determination, fire. The door creaked open, breaking the moment. Dominic Hale sauntered in, tailored suit pristine. His smug smile sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't bother knocking, he never did. Lovely speech, he drawled, clapping slowly. I almost believed it. Isabella stiffened, her hands curling into fists. We're closed, Dominic. He ignored her, striding to the bar and pouring himself a glass of wine as though he owned the place. I just came to offer a friendly reminder. Your debts aren't going away. Your suppliers are restless. And your precious restaurant is dangling by a thread. He swirled the wine lazily, savoring the moment. All it would take is one word from me, one signature, and all your problems vanish. You'd be secure, comfortable, respected. Richard shifted uncomfortably, but Isabella rose to her feet before he could speak. She walked across the room, heels clicking against the floor, and slammed her palm on the bar so hard that the glasses rattled. Get out, she hissed. Dominic raised his brows, feigning surprise. Isabella. No. Her voice rang like a whip. You think I'll sell myself and my mother's dream for comfort? You think you can waltz in here and offer me salvation like I'm some damsel waiting to be rescued? She leaned closer, her eyes locked on his. I would rather watch this trattoria burn to the ground than let you own a single brick of it. The mask slipped from Dominic's face for a moment, replaced by something darker. Anger, maybe even humiliation. But he quickly plastered on his smirk again, though his jaw twitched. Stubborn as always, he muttered. Don't say I didn't warn you. Without me, or your little apron-clad liar, you'll drown. He tipped the wine glass toward her in mock salute and strolled out, his footsteps echoing in the silence he left behind. Isabella stood frozen, her pulse racing, her breath sharp in her lungs. Then she turned to Richard and Sophia, her voice steady even though her hands trembled. Let him come. Let all of them come. This trattoria will stand because we'll make it stand. Together. For the first time in weeks, Richard smiled, weary but proud. Sophia squeezed her hand again, and Isabella felt the fire inside her roar higher. Alex might have broken her heart. Dominic might have tried to break her spirit. But Isabella Daniel would not be broken. Chapter 24. The grand gesture. The trattoria was quiet that morning, the hum of the refrigerators and the soft patter of rain against the windows the only sounds filling the air. Isabella sat at her mother's old desk in the back office, a stack of unopened letters weighing heavily before her. Most of them were bills, reminders of debts, final notices that had become a familiar knot in her stomach. With a sigh, she opened the newest envelope, bracing for another blow. But what she found made her breath catch. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a warning. It was a receipt. Stamped, sealed, and official. The debts were gone. Every cent cleared. Suppliers paid. The landlord satisfied. The trattoria, her mother's dream, finally free. Her heart stuttered, disbelief clawing at her chest. She scrambled for the next envelope, tearing it open with shaking hands. Another receipt. And another. One after the other. Each letter told the same impossible truth. "Papa!" Isabella cried, her voice breaking as she leapt from the chair, clutching the papers to her chest. Richard appeared in the doorway, alarm etched across his features. "What is it?" "They're gone." Isabella laughed, half sobbing as tears streaked her cheeks. "The debts, all of them, cleared. Papa, we're free." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. For once, words failed him. He simply crossed the room and wrapped his daughter in a trembling embrace. But Isabella's joy was pierced by a question, sharp and insistent. Who had done this? And then, as though her heart already knew the answer, she heard it. A sound outside, faint over the rain. A stillness that made her chest tighten. She ran out of the trattoria, barefoot on the slick cobblestones, the papers pressed against her chest. And there he was. Alex stood across the street, rain soaking through his shirt, plastering it to his frame. His dark hair clung to his forehead. His eyes fixed on her with a vulnerability that made her knees weak. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, tall and heartbreakingly handsome, as though rooted to the spot. "Alex!" Her voice cracked, the name torn between anger, relief, and longing. He took a step closer, water dripping from his lashes. "It wasn't about saving you, Isabella. It was about giving you what should have always been yours. This trattoria, your mother's legacy, belongs to you. Not to me. Not to my father. Only you." She shook her head, tears mingling with the rain. "Why? Why would you do this after everything?" His chest rose with a ragged breath. "Because I love you. And love isn't power, it isn't control. It's sacrifice. It's wanting you to stand taller, even if it means I stand alone." His voice broke, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want your forgiveness if I haven't earned it. But I needed you to know that I would give up everything, every cent, every piece of who I was, if it meant seeing you free." The rain fell harder, thunder rumbling in the distance. Isabella stood frozen, her heart a battlefield of hurt and hope. The man before her wasn't the arrogant heir she thought she knew. He was Alex, the clumsy kitchen hand who had learned her rhythms, who had carried her grief without judgment, who had made her laugh in the darkest nights. And now he was the man standing in the rain, stripped of wealth, yet offering her the only thing that mattered: his heart. Her hands trembled as she lowered the papers, her lips parting. She took a step toward him. Then another. When she reached him, she searched his face, rain sliding down his jaw like tears. Slowly, as though afraid she might vanish, Alex lifted a hand to brush wet strands of hair from her face. "Say the word, Isabella," he whispered, "and I'll walk away forever. Or I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be the man you deserve." Her chest heaved, emotion strangling her. The trattoria was safe. Her family's dream had been saved. And in front of her stood the man who had lied, yes, but who had also given her the greatest truth of all: that love was not wealth or power or legacy. Love was this. She surged forward, her lips crashing against his, the papers tumbling into the rain. For the first time in weeks, the storm inside her quieted. And though the rain poured down, Isabella felt only warmth. Chapter 25. From rags to riches. The trattoria was alive again. Warm light spilled through the windows onto the cobblestone street, golden against the evening rain. Inside, laughter and chatter filled every corner as tables brimmed with customers. The once faded sign above the door gleamed with fresh paint: "Daniel's Trattoria, since 1989. The smell of garlic and basil wove through the air, clinging to the walls, wrapping every guest in comfort. It was no longer the struggling business it had been weeks ago, it was now a symbol. A local magazine had featured them just that morning. The little trattoria that could. Their resilience, their revival, and their story had captured hearts. Behind the counter, Isabella moved with a new lightness in her step. She stirred a pot of sauce, tasting and nodding, her hair pulled back in its usual messy bun, a streak of flour across her cheek. Beside her, Alex worked at the stove, sleeves rolled, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. They moved in perfect rhythm, shoulder to shoulder, their laughter mingling with the sounds of clinking plates and sizzling pans. Sophia darted in and out with trays, Richard greeted regulars at the door, and the trattoria, her mother's dream, felt whole again. At one point, Isabella glanced at Alex, catching the softness in his eyes as he worked. A warmth spread in her chest. She had fought so hard against him, against herself, but now she could finally admit the truth. His love had been genuine all along. Not because of what he could buy, but because of what he was willing to give up. She reached over, brushing her flour-streaked fingers against his hand. He turned and she smiled. "We did it." Alex's throat tightened, but he smiled back. "No, Isabella. You did it. I just had the honor of standing beside you." Before she could answer, the door creaked open. The trattoria seemed to pause. Victor Knight stood in the doorway. His sharp suit was immaculate, his presence commanding, but for the first time, there was no edge of arrogance in his gaze. The staff stilled. Customers whispered. Isabella froze mid-step, her chest tightening. Alex, beside her, stiffened, his jaw clenching. Victor's eyes swept the trattoria, the bustling tables, the smiling faces, the life in every corner, and then landed on his son. For a long moment, father and son simply stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken history. Then Victor did something no one expected. He walked to a table. He sat down. And he picked up a menu. "I'll have the special," he said. His voice steady but softer than usual. "With a glass of red." Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella exchanged a wary glance with Alex, but Alex, swallowing hard, approached. When the plate was placed before him, Victor picked up his fork, tasted the food, and nodded. "It's good. Better than anything I've eaten at the night hotels." Silence followed. Then slowly Victor set down his fork. He looked at Alex, his expression uncharacteristically raw. "I was wrong." His voice carried through the quiet trattoria. "Wrong to think ambition was everything. Wrong to try to shape you into me. You've built something real here, son. Something I never gave you. And..." He exhaled, the weight of pride and regret breaking through. "I'm sorry." The words hit Alex harder than he expected. His chest ached, his throat thickened, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel chained to his father's shadow. He felt seen. Victor straightened slightly, regaining his composure. "The company is still yours, Alex. Your rightful inheritance. But I won't force you into my mold. Run it how you see fit. Or don't run it at all. Just don't shut me out completely." For a heartbeat, Alex said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Maybe we'll figure it out. But on my terms." Victor's lips quirked into the smallest of smiles. He raised his glass as though in a quiet toast, and then turned back to his meal, leaving Alex and Isabella to their kitchen. Isabella stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "Looks like he's learning from you." Alex slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Or maybe from us." Together, they returned to the stove, to the heartbeat of the trattoria. The clatter of dishes and the warmth of family surrounded them, the air thick with love and hope. From deception and poverty they had found truth. From rags to riches, they had built something greater than fortune. A home, a future, and a love that would endure. And as the trattoria thrived, Alexander Knight, once a chained heir, now a free man, smiled at the life he had chosen. Side by side with Isabella, in the kitchen where it all began. Thanks for listening to Lam Audiobooks. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more episodes. Until next time, keep listening.